Welcome, everyone, to Parenting as a Hero's Journey. I'm Barbara Nicholson, and Lysa Parker will be joining me in our discussion of mindful parenting, the spiritual essence of attachment. So what we'll be doing is taking the 8 principles of parenting that we discuss in depth in our book, Attached at the Heart, and dive into the core teachings of attachment, love, and the spiritual connection with our children and with our higher selves. I will be discussing the first 2 principles, then Lysa will discuss the next 2, and we'll be going back and forth as we discuss all 8 principles. Nothing is more life-changing than becoming a parent, and we can use this time in our lives for a deeper understanding of our roots, our own childhood experiences in our families, and we'll be taking you on a journey and inviting you to go on a journey back several generations to see what patterns that we love about our family and what we learned in our homes, and some things that we want to change in our own relationships with our partners, with our children, with our friends. So let's begin by diving into our first principle, which is prepare for pregnancy, birth, and parenting. So one important step in preparing for our parenting journey is to take some time to reflect on what characteristics do we want our children to have as adults. Of course, we all want our children to be happy, but what about the quality of their characters? What kind of home environment would produce a child with those qualities? So if you have a journal, or if you want to take a moment to close your eyes and kind of reflect, see your child growing up into an adult. What characteristics do you want this young adult to have? And what home environment could produce this kind of young adult? So keep those thoughts in your heart. Write them down. We'll come back to them again as we go through these principles and become a little more mindful about our parenting with that goal in mind, with that vision in mind. So when we talk about preparing for our pregnancy, so much of the focus is, of course, on the mother. She's preparing her body, her mind, and her spirit for the pregnancy. But let's also reflect on how this applies to her partner and other people in her lives, even her parents, her in-laws, her siblings. Everyone has and will have an influence on this developing baby. All caregivers involved in this baby's life are critical to supporting the mother to be the best that she can be. So let's think about that. How can everyone contribute to the health of this baby? Maybe it's in preparing healthy meals, maybe changing some habits, getting a little more exercise. Doing this as a team is so wonderful for the mother. But another really important aspect that we talk about in this principle is attending childbirth classes and becoming very educated about all the decisions you'll have to make as a parent. So being mindful means that you're going to be very discriminating. There was a great study done back in the 70s by a researcher who was very curious about what creates a peak experience in someone's life. When we describe something that's really, a milestone or a peak experience, it's usually something that's very spiritually life-changing, something that we had goals about, we accomplished. So she researched mothers who were taking childbirth classes, mostly with a partner, and mothers who did not take any kind of preparation classes for their birth. And she was very excited to see that the mothers who were prepared and had a partner supporting them did report overwhelmingly a peak experience in their birth. We know now that our bodies produce hormones like adrenaline and oxytocin that give unmedicated mothers this extra boost of euphoria. So that's why we feel that so many of these mothers did report even having less pain than mothers who were medicated, because they had this extra help. But it's also the psychological help of having a partner there, being surrounded by supportive people, that seems to make a huge difference in how a mother sees her birth as not only a joyful, euphoric experience, but a very spiritual experience for a lot of these moms. So that begins the journey of empowerment. So even if you don't have the most ideal birth, the idea is when you're prepared, when you're part of the team, if you need to have a medical intervention, you know why, that this is helping you transition into birth in a very educated and empowered way. So another reflective question you could ask yourself is, what influences you about birth and parenting? You know, of course, we know it's our own parents for a lot of us, and maybe hearing our mother's birth stories. But we also have friends, we have family members. We are very influenced by media, what we see on television and movies. So take some moments to reflect on that. Are these the models that you think of as being helpful, or do they fill you with fear? And this can help you on all the decisions you need to make. So as you become informed about birth, you'll need to make many more decisions about your pregnancy. For instance, whether you would like, to have ultrasound or not. Is it medically necessary? Many doctors now are inducing births. Epidurals are part of their routine birth experience. So making those decisions consciously with your provider is so important. And then after your baby's born, you'll be bombarded with decisions, whether you'll circumcise your baby boy, whether you'll have different procedures like immunizations and other tests that some doctors want to run. So all these things are becoming a mindful parent's journey, a conscious parent's journey into preparing for parenting. So another important decision is going into principle 2. How will I feed my baby with love and respect? So this principle is wonderfully rich in attachment information, because feeding our baby is probably one of the first things that we'll do after we deliver the baby. So you'll need to make this decision, breast or bottle. Some of us can maybe breastfeed for a few weeks, and then maybe we need to transition to a bottle. But let's look at why breastfeeding is the attachment model. Our baby is put to the breast, meaning that they're getting a sensory bath of taste, sight, touch, smell, hearing. All of the senses are being stimulated in that very first feeding of our baby. They need to feel our skin and hear our heartbeat and our voice, all these familiar things that they've been experiencing while they were in the womb. Science tells us that the baby's vision can only focus about 11 inches. So that's the perfect distance when the mother is feeding her baby for her baby to really imprint and look for the mother's face. So it's a wonderful, profound moment that can be continued. So as the mother grows and the baby grows in her decisions about feeding her baby, she'll do it from a much more conscious perspective. We know that breastfeeding is also the model for attachment, because the mother and baby are really listening to each other's cues about when the baby's hungry, when the baby needs to be fed. So again, a bottle feeding mother can trust that her baby will tell her when she's hungry, when she's satiated, and it may be that she's hungry again in an hour. That's very much like the breastfeeding relationship. The mother's body and the baby's cues become in sync with each other. So it's a beautiful dance of connection, of trust, that mother and baby will be kind of in communication about the feeding needs. And this is really developing that attachment relationship. So again, taking this opportunity to be mindful about feeding our baby as an infant can also go into the toddler years when you're starting solids with your baby. You know your baby better than anyone. So if your baby's giving you cues, to start solids, a little bit earlier than 6 months, which is what's recommended, well, then you can, listen to your baby. Some babies will go much longer, especially babies that are prone to allergies and things like that. So this sensitivity, this attunement that you're developing through feeding your baby is a wonderful introduction into that attachment process. And you're also developing trust around food. So we know that, as adults, some people have a lot of problems with food issues, but developing this attunement with your child will assure you that food will not be a source of conflict. So as we get into the older child, you've started solids now, and you've had your baby's experiencing many different flavors. If you're a breastfeeding mother, they've been experiencing flavors through your milk. It translates beautifully into being very conscious about how we use food for connection with our family. So when you think about countries around the world that, I'm thinking about Italy, France, there's many European countries that it's still a tradition to kind of, stores close and people go home for lunch and have a wonderful reconnection with their families at lunchtime. So in our culture, where that's not part of the work day, we'll have to be a little more conscious about using our evening meals. And maybe for some of us, it's just on the weekends. But if we use food as our time of connection, rather as a time of disconnection, it can be a wonderful way for us to gather, to hear each other's joys and experiences from their day or from their week. And using this time of connection is one of the most powerful attachment promoting behaviors we have. So I'd like to turn this over to Lysa, and she'll be talking about principles 3 and 4.
Thank you, Barbara. And to our listening audience, I'm very excited to be here to share what we've been learning about over the last 21 years and longer. We are, older moms now, and hopefully a little wiser than we were when we had children. Of all the attachment research, responding with sensitivity is the key to creating secure attachment. And it is the essence of the development of empathy. I want to share a quote by Dr. Selma Freiberg, who was a pioneer in the 60s and 70s, and was really a strong advocate for children. She says, "There is the language of the embrace, the language of the eyes, the language of the smile, vocal communications of pleasure and distress. It is the essential vocabulary of love before we can speak love." And so that quote to me speaks of spirituality, it speaks of mindfulness, it speaks of the ultimate expression of love, because we know that our infants are bundles of feelings and needs, and they come into this world wired to expect that their needs will be responded to. And when they're not responded to, it causes the brain to rewire in what they call a more adaptive way. But if we respond to their needs and we're there for them when they need us, we may not know what their need is every time, but over a period of weeks and months, we will become what they call attuned to our child. We will know what their cry is. We will have a better sense of what their need might be. We will have that mental checklist that we can go through to figure out what it is they need. And often it's just to be in close proximity, to feel the mother's warmth, the father's warmth, their heartbeat, and their smells. When we respond with sensitivity, it causes us to be more mindful, but also causes us to detach more and more from our ego. When we cling to our ego, we tend to take our child's behavior personally, and therefore it affects the way we respond, and we tend to respond in a less empathic way. But if we detach from our ego, then we are able to respond in a more sensitive and loving way, one of unconditional love. And some of you may be thinking, well, what is the difference between sympathy and empathy? And so the way we usually describe it is that sympathy is you're feeling sorry for someone, but you really don't feel their pain. You can't put yourself in their shoes. But with empathy, you are putting yourself in their shoes, in their booties, so to speak, and you're looking at the world through their eyes. What must my child be feeling right now? What must my child be thinking right now? And so in our book, we wrote a description about what is empathy. And we know that the definition of empathy is feeling the feelings of others as if it is our own. So when you respond to your baby, or any other human being for that matter, with empathy, you convey these implicit messages. I want to understand how you feel. I hurt when you hurt. We're in this together. Your feelings matter to me. I trust you. I respect you. I will help you feel better. I honor you. I care about you. Let's work this out together. I'm here if you need me. You can trust me. You matter to me. You can count on me. I see the world through your eyes. I will always be here for you. I love you no matter what you do. And that sounds all wonderful in theory, doesn't it? But what if you're a mom and a dad who didn't have the best childhood? What if you don't have a full emotional tank yourselves and you're needing that kind of empathic response yourself? And we realize that this is something we all share. And so it's real important for us to identify our pain, to understand that those wounds come from childhood. And Dr. Harville Hendricks talks about when we have difficulty responding to a child at a certain age, it's likely a wound from our past. And that's why in our book, we emphasize the need for all of us to reflect on our childhood experiences, because we know that's going to affect how we respond to our children. And in closing, for this principle, just take a moment and think about your own childhood. And was there a person that you remember that you completely trusted, that you went to for comfort, for empathy? And it might not have been someone who was with you every day or all the time, but just, occasionally. It could be someone other than your parents. It could have been a grandparent, a relative, a neighbor. So if you are keeping a journal or writing notes, think about that and reflect on that, because often it is those people that we consider our helpers, our mentors, that give us just enough love to kind of push us through life and get us to the next step in life. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to delve into our childhood issues from the past. So I want to encourage you to keep working on that. So now we're going to go on to the next principle, which is use nurturing touch. Touch is something that's very underestimated and undervalued in our country, in our culture. In fact, touch has become a bad thing for many young children, because if they are in childcare, we've heard of states that are now outlawing teachers' ability to touch a child, to comfort a child, to hold a child. And it's just heartbreaking to us, because that is what children need more than anything. So we know from research, and this is what's kept us going all these years. When we first started talking about forming Attachment Parenting International, it was some of the brain research that was coming out that was stimulating our drive to get this information into the hands of parents. And now there's research being done on touch at the University of Miami Touch Institute. Dr. Tiffany Field is one of the leading researchers there. And it's just literally amazing what touch does to the physiology of the body. And I want to share a quote that I think is very beautiful. It's poetic. It really puts us into a mindful state when we're thinking about an infant's need for touch. It is through our hands that we speak to the child, that we communicate. Touching is the primary language. The newborn baby's skin has an intelligence, a sensitivity that we can only begin to imagine. How then ought we to touch, to handle a newborn baby? Very simply, by remembering what this infant has just left behind, by never forgetting that everything new and unknown might terrify, and that everything recognizable and familiar is reassurance. To calm the infant in this strange, incomprehensible world into which it has emerged, it is necessary and enough that the hands holding him should speak in the language of the womb. And so when we think about the way new parents are prepared for having a new baby, they're advised to get all these contraptions and gadgets, everything you can think of to keep the baby away from the child, from the parent, whereas they need to be as in close proximity as possible. And of course, this does require mindfulness, because many of us weren't touched when we were children, or touched enough, or maybe touched in a positive way. And so it's something that we can learn. That's why we recommend baby wearing. That's why we recommend infant massage. Infant massage is just a wonderful tool for mothers and fathers. And fathers would readily agree that sometimes they feel kind of left out if the mom is breastfeeding and taking care of the baby a lot. They sometimes feel lost as to what they can do to help console the baby, to help the baby sleep and better. And this is a wonderful way of helping fathers and babies bond, helping fathers become more attuned to their baby, understand their behavioral states, and helping them sleep better, helping comfort them. It's just a fantastic tool. And what we know from science is that touch stimulates this hormone called oxytocin, which we know is often called the hormone of love. It's the bonding hormone. It's the hormone of love. It's what we feel when we fall in love, that rush of excitement and pure love. And that's what babies need from their parents. It stimulates what Dr. Field says, a virtual pharmacy. So it stimulates in the child all these wonderful chemicals and hormones and growth hormone. And, you know, we know from mistakes from the past that Children who were not touched enough didn't grow. So we need to be touching our children in a very positive and loving way. Take a minute now to reflect on your own childhood. Did you experience a little bit of touch, loving touch, or a lot of loving touch? Or was touch a negative thing for you, a negative experience? Remember how it made you feel. How has it affected you now as an adult? Do you find it difficult to give touch? So with that, I'm going to close on this principle of nurturing touch because we go into much more depth and we share the science behind it that supports it in our book. And I will turn it over to Barbara to talk about the next two principles.
Thank you, Lysa. Well, talking about touch and responsiveness is a beautiful segue into this next principle, which is ensure safe sleep physically and emotionally. So for many of us, we had our babies and we're out, with family or friends, and often their first, perhaps well-meaning question is, do you have a good baby? Meaning, does your baby sleep a lot? So it really can produce anxiety in a new parent because they may be taught through this that the expectation is if your baby is, quote, good, then they sleep a lot and they let you kind of have your life back. But we know that babies are not programmed to sleep a lot, especially in those early weeks when they're needing, yes, they sleep, but they need to be fed a lot. They need to be held. They need to be comforted. So if we could reassure parents, especially in this principle, that the key is attunement, learning your baby, getting the rest that you need as a parent so that you can meet these nighttime needs too, are really important. So I'm going to invite you to maybe close your eyes. I'm going to read you a little poem that was written by Dr. Isabel Fox, who's a family therapist and really is very sensitive to the nighttime needs of young children. The poem is called The Difference Between Night and Day. Daytime gives us sunlight. Nighttime brings on darkness. Daytime is familiar. Nighttime is strange. Daytime is for activity. Nighttime is for comforting. Daytime is for learning. Nighttime is for dreaming. Daytime is for exploration. Nighttime is for closeness. Daytime is for mastery. Nighttime is for fantasy. Daytime breeds confidence and security. Nighttime may breed anxiety and fear. So let's reflect on this for a few minutes. Did this bring up any childhood memories for you about nighttime? Did you have nighttime needs? Maybe a lovey, a stuffed animal, a favorite doll or toy. And also, did you feel some fears at night? And how were those fears dealt with? Were you comforted by your parents? Were you, or were you told that you're on your own at night? That's a time for forcing our little ones to have more adult expectations and self-comforting and self-soothing. So learning about the actual biological need for a child, for touch, all these things that we've been talking about, responsiveness, attunement, they don't shut it off at 7 or 8 o'clock at night. This is a need that goes especially into the nighttime. So if we can put ourselves in our babies' booties, in our babies' consciousness, by going back ourselves into those early years of our lives, can be a tremendous mindful experience in empathy and in kind of maybe even healing from some of our wounds of early childhood. So another reflection is, did anyone sing to you when you were a little child? And many of us do have very comforting memories of a parent or maybe a grandparent holding us, rocking us, singing favorite songs. This can be a time of great healing from a stressful day. And we're big believers, of course, in touch and holding, but also the power of language, the power of song is universal. Every culture in the world has lullabies that they sing to their babies. So in our book, we talk about some of the research behind that, which is really thrilling to see that they show that there's better child development, better language development in children that are sung to, because language is a rich relational experience. So having a nurturing transitional time to going to sleep at night is very powerful for the baby and the young child, but of course it's very powerful for the parent, because it's an opportunity for us to either share some of those traditions from our own family or create them for our children. And we invite you to, listen to lullaby CDs and things like that if you need to learn some songs. Now, in our book, we go into depth about creating a safe sleep environment for your baby and young child. So often, parents are very concerned that they hear that, you should never have the baby in bed with you, and have a lot of fears around creating a safe sleep environment, which is very understandable. So we do encourage parents to go to our website, our book about creating safe sleep. But remember, and you can share this with your pediatrician, that even the American Academy of Pediatrics is recommending that the baby be in close proximity for the first 6 months of life. That means in the same room with you. So you should have the baby within arm's reach. And again, it is so healing for parents to hear that, because we have worries. What mother or father hasn't, hovered over their sleeping baby, wondering, are they breathing okay? Are they all right? You want to touch them and make sure, because they're so little. So having them in that close proximity does alleviate a lot of that fear, and it helps the parents get more rest. And a breastfeeding mother, of course, feels like, I can just scoop my baby up and breastfeed them, and then we can just kind of go off to sleep again. Well, you can only do that if you're being very conscious and mindful about that safe environment. So rather than go into the laundry list of recommendations, I will just say that in general, you want to have a very firm mattress, free from fluffy bedding and things like that. And no smoking, drug use, or alcohol use going on around the baby. So let me transition now into the next principle, which is providing consistent and loving care for your baby. So all these principles have been talking about that attunement and empowering you as a parent to know that you know your baby better than anyone, better than the grandparents, better than your pediatrician. You're the expert. So when it comes to making the decision about substitute care, whether you're going back to work or whether you're just trying to find a babysitter for an evening out, your sensitivity to your baby will be the greatest guide in making that decision and when is the best time to make these transitions. Now, for a lot of parents, they feel like they don't have a choice. So we're really excited that in this chapter of our book and in this principle, we are encouraging some real creative thinking here that will enable you to make the best decision for your family. We have some excellent books and resources. One of our favorite books that we recommend to new parents is Being There, The Benefits of a Stay-at-Home Parent by Dr. Isabel Fox. And the title is a little misleading. She's not trying to make the case that every parent has to stay home, full time with their babies. She's just trying to help educate parents about the baby's needs for what we call the 4 Ps, for protection, predictability, proximity, and play. So when these 4 needs are the attachment building blocks for relationship, it helps parents make a better decision when they have to choose substitute care, whether it's full-time, going back to work, or just going out for the evening. Another great book that we recommend is The 4 Thirds Solution by Stanley Greenspan and T. Barry Brazelton. And their research is pretty overwhelming about their concerns about a lot, hours and hours of substitute care with very young babies, because studies have shown that this can lead to more aggression and more, behavior problems in children if those needs aren't met with sensitivity. So being cognizant of how stressful substitute care can be on young babies and children. We've talked about, how cortisol levels go up when babies are under a lot of stress. So just recognizing that helps a parent understand the need for making a transition. So say you have to go back to work and your baby is very young. Looking at some of these possible different configurations of care are very empowering to parents. And we hope our book would be very helpful in helping you make better decisions on substitute care. So we do go into talking about different strategies. So the book, The 4 Thirds Solution, is asking a couple, could each of you be the primary caregivers? Could you, swap out your hours where you work? And I know for many couples, they can. Maybe one works more in the mornings and one works more in the afternoons or evenings. So they can kind of create different shifts when they're working so that there's an overlap where they can be the primary caregivers and maybe just use substitute care a few hours a day. And talking to family members, friends, especially friends that you feel like have very similar parenting styles, and they would like to barter with you about childcare, or finding a home care situation where you go and visit and you're very cognizant and mindful of how the caregivers interact with their own children or other children under their care. So you're just being a community builder in a way too, because you're expressing your need for, a high touch, loving, responsive caregiving situation. So, looking at all your options in the community, some of you may work somewhere where there's on-site care, where you can check in with your baby frequently, maybe feed them on breaks or at lunchtime. There's just wonderful options once you start getting creative and talking to other parents in the community about what they do. So I want to transition now into letting Lysa finish up with the last 2 principles.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm going to talk about the next principle, Principle 7, which is practice positive discipline. Now, this is probably the principle that challenges our ability to remain mindful more than any other principle. And when we have our support group meetings, when we talk about discipline, we have the best attendance. So it's a real challenge for us to maintain this level of conscious, loving, mindful parenting, intentional parenting, whatever you want to call it. And that goes back to what I talked about before, and that is those childhood wounds. I know that, sometimes you think that you've dealt with these wounds, you're ready to move on. I don't want to go back. I don't want to revisit it. But the problem is that our brains force us to do that. And because everything that we've experienced in life up to that point, up to where you are today, is stored in the brain, in the part of the brain called the amygdala. And so when we get stressed out, we operate from the amygdala, not from our thinking, rational, loving mind. I love Dr. Daniel Siegel's hand model for the brain, where you take your hand, you make a fist, and you tuck your thumb inside your fist. Your thumb represents the amygdala. The top of your hand represents the neocortex. Your arm represents the spine. The front of your hands represent the prefrontal cortex. And so when your amygdala gets triggered, you flip your fingers up, and that's what happens when we flip our lids. So we lose control of our rational mind and operate on the amygdala. And so that represents why we need to do the inner work. And that's what mindfulness is. That's what conscious parenting is, intentional parenting. It's doing the inner work for ourselves so that we can be there for our children. Now, I want to share another quote with you from our book. And if you haven't read any of books by Dr. Gordon Neufeld and Gabor Mate, they're wonderful books. Dr. Neufeld is a professor, and he teaches about attachment. He has 5 children. He's a strong advocate for the attachment relationship. And Dr. Gabor Mate, also a strong advocate for attachment. And he deals with a lot of adults who didn't have that attachment, who may be addicted to drugs because they're looking for that, to fulfill that bond or that void that they have. What they say in their book is the crowning achievement of a working attachment is to instill in a child the desire to be good. What we don't see is that it's the child's attachment to the adult that fosters that goodness. So where it might be confusing about the whole attachment model, what researchers and experts refer to, it's the child who attaches to the parent, not the parent to the child necessarily, but the parent bonds with the child. So what we're trying to nurture is the child's attachment to the parent. And on that basis, they're saying it instills in the child the desire to be good. And if we think of it in adult terms, when we're with our spouse, when our spouse is meeting our needs and everything is fine, they're meeting our love language, so to speak, and we're happy and everything is going great, then we want to do nice things for our partner, right? But when our partner is not meeting our needs, they're not communicating, they're disconnected, then we feel a whole array of different feelings. We might feel abandoned. We might feel disconnected. We might feel that our spouse or partner doesn't love us anymore. And so then we start acting out. We start doing things that might not be appropriate, might be saying things. So if we put it in an adult perspective, it's no different with children. So we want to please the people that we love. No child wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to make my parents stay miserable, and neither does a parent wake up feeling that way about their child. So when you're having difficulty, it's a sign or a signal that you need to do more inner work. And so many of us weren't raised this way, right? So it doesn't come naturally to us. Our children push our buttons, which, remember, are the childhood wounds. And we don't really understand where our children are coming from. So again, it's about putting ourselves in the mind of our child, seeing the world through our child's eyes. And if we get burned out, and we always do, then that's another red flag that it's time to nourish and nurture ourselves. That's why it's so important to have more people in the child's life. If you're a single parent, create your own extended family. And remember that the goal of positive discipline, this is different from what our culture tells us. We want our children to develop inner self-discipline, to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, not because they're afraid they're going to get punished. That's hard. It's different than the culture. So it does take an enormous amount of consciousness and mindful parenting. And we go into much more detail in our book. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm going to move on to our eighth and final principle, which kind of goes hand in hand with positive discipline, and that is striving for balance in our personal and family life. This is something that we deal with on a daily basis. And if you're out of balance one day, don't be negative towards yourself. Don't beat yourself up. It's like, tomorrow's a new day. And if you find yourself needing nourishment, needing fulfillment in some way, then think about it the night before. I think of it as taking an account of each day and thinking about, what do I need to nourish myself spiritually? What do I need to nourish myself intellectually or physically? We call that the daily self-assessment checklist. It's in our book. And if you could just do one small thing each day, and we're not talking about hours, we're not talking, even 10 or 15 minutes can help you enormously. And so if you have a young child that you can't leave, perhaps you can find someone in your neighborhood or someone in your family that the baby is familiar with, that you can trust to play with the baby while you lock yourself in your bedroom and read or meditate or do yoga, just whatever. So there are ways to be creative and to put yourself first. We have to focus on ourselves because we can't give what we don't have. The other aspect of striving for balance is focusing on the parental relationship, because children need both parents. And it's easy to become so absorbed in our babies and in our children's lives that we forget about our husbands, we forget about our partners, we forget about the relationship. And so sometimes we women have to be pulled back and refocused to remember that our spouse is a very important part of that child's life, and so is your relationship. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be spontaneous. And positive communication is really, really important for nurturing that relationship. And I personally worked on that myself, and I highly recommend Imago Therapy, developed by Dr. Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt. They wrote the book, Getting the Love You Want and Keeping the Love You Have. And they also wrote a book for parents. So I highly recommend checking into that, going online, checking into gettingtheloveyouwant.com and seeing if there are therapists in your area or a couples retreat that you can go to in a nearby area that can really put you back on the right track. It's just a wonderful way of nurturing the relationship. And along those lines, that goes with positive discipline as well, is nonviolent communication, NVC, or you can go to cnvc.org. They will help you in learning ways to communicate in a loving and respectful manner by recognizing the feelings and needs of your children and of the other important adults in your child's life. So with that, I'm going to wind up principle number 8. Of course, as usual, we get into much more detail in our book, and we hope that that you will find what you need in our book attached at the heart. So in closing, I want to thank you for joining us on our webinar, Mindful Parenting, the Spiritual Essence of Attachment. We want to thank Rebecca Thompson for helping us with this webinar, and Lysa Reagan at Kindred for inviting us to share our thoughts and our passion for parenting. We continue to learn ourselves how to be mindful and intentional in our interactions with our loved ones. It's a lifelong process. Be kind to your child. Be kind to yourselves. We invite you to visit our website, attachmentparenting.org, where you can find a lot of information that can be of help to you. You can find support groups in your area. If you want to be a leader, there's information about how to become an API leader. And of course, if you're interested in purchasing our book, you can do that on our website as well, attachmentparenting.org. Thank you so much for tuning in to our webinar, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future. Thank you.